Hey,
Good to be here.
thanks for joining us, mate. We're here talking about Melbourne Uni basketball, and we're hoping to fill in the gaps a little bit during your era of involvement. Which was what?
58 through about maybe 65, I think, or 65. Yep. But there were a period of 2 years in the middle where I'd been appointed to a country technical school where I wasn't seen around Melbourne University. It was really 4 years undergraduate course. Then a couple of years later on, when I didn't play, I just coached.
So you joined the university as an undergraduate in what year?
58.
58. And had you played much basketball prior to that?
Zero. Absolutely none. My introduction to basketball was the 56 Melbourne Olympics, and we had TV. So I saw a lot of basketball, and it sort of appealed. At that stage, I was totally Aussie rules, okay, and athletics. And I was pretty fit. I was skinny. So when I went to university, I was only about, well, I don't know the kilograms, but 11 stone, 11 pound, which isn't much, right? I built up to 13 stone, 5 pound, which is about what I weigh now, I know, and that's about 85 kilograms at about 185 or 6'1". So I wasn't big.
And how did you come across the basketball program, or how did they come across you?
I spent a bit of time over in the Borough Pair, and I got into the gym and lifted a few weights and that sort of thing because I felt as though I needed to put stuff on. And one weekend when I didn't go home to Geelong, I was hanging around in the change room, and a whole lot of guys came in. They'd been training for basketball in the Borough Pair, the main gym, the basketball stadium. It was the only one at Melbourne then. And I thought this could be interesting. And a couple of them started chatting to me. And I finished up joining probably halfway through the year, about the middle of winter. Okay. And I played in the bottom team. Don't ask me what division it was. And we played at the Dog Pavilion at the Melbourne Showgrounds. It was not a good environment. You couldn't throw high passes at all. You couldn't shoot too high. The roof wasn't, all the struts for the roof weren't high, right? But it worked, and I learned a bit about the game, but not very much. We didn't train. We just turned up and played.
Was
Right?
there was there 10-foot rings, and were there many courts at the Dog Pavilion?
Can't really remember. There were several. No, were 10-foot rings, yeah. Oh, it was fair dinkum, all marked out properly and so on. They were proper basketball courts, as far as I could tell at that stage, because I'd never been on one before. And it was really just a pipe opener, and no training. The team didn't train. We just was a scratch team basically that just turned up, and some nights there'd only be 6 or 7 people turn up, so you're a bit pushed unless you were fit. And most of us were about my age, 17, 18, whatever, thinking about playing the game. I don't think any of us had previously played, or anyone who had would be in a higher team than this scratch team.
How many teams were there for Melbourne University at that time?
I think about 4 altogether. The firsts, I think, I don't really know what happened with the other teams because I didn't actually see them. Next year, I was in, I think, the thirds, but it was still pretty. We played at Albert Park, out on one of the outside courts, about, I don't know, probably 6th or 7th grade, right, on a Wednesday night. So it was Victorian Championships. And
Outside, outdoor, or
no, outside, not the big number one court, right. Albert Park basketball things still exist, doesn't it? They still play there, I would think.
Well, the old stadium's gone now, but we have a new stadium.
Right, okay. I haven't been down there for a long time. Yeah, yeah, so, and that was good, and I learned a bit about the game. I forget who the coach was. In my third year, Jerry Tickle was our coach, right? Do you know Jerry?
I don't.
Oh, okay, well, he's older than me, so if he wouldn't have been around the MUBC and so on for years and years and years. Jerry was a good coach, and I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot from him that year. And we played on the number 2 court at Albert Park on a Monday night, okay, which was the business houses competition. We didn't win, but we did fairly well. We probably won more games than we lost. I was learning what the game was about. I was playing with guys who knew what the game was about. Jerry could teach me what the game was about because he'd been playing it for years. And I really enjoyed it and got serious about it. And that's about when I changed from having a girlfriend in Geelong, which meant that I wanted to be in Geelong at the weekend, to having a girlfriend in Melbourne, which meant that I wanted to be in Melbourne at the weekend. So I could go to proper training on Saturday afternoon. And we'd train early, and the firsts would train after us, right? Big squad, there would have been 20 of us. But they picked a team or a team to go each week, and not everyone got to play every week. But it was the only, I think it was the lowest MUBC team that actually coached and actually were professional about it, if you like. Yep.
Were there any women's teams for Melbourne Uni at that time?
No, no. I would know. Hey, I was pretty interested in women at that stage, and if there had been women training in the Borough Pair, I would have known about it. But no, there weren't. No way. See, I think MUBC only really started about 55. Do you know Norm, or you know Norm Longmuir?
Yeah, we've had a chat about the beginning.
Yeah, Norm would know far more about those years. And when I was in, I think, the thirds, let's call them the thirds, Norm was in the firsts. I had a lot to do with Norm later in life. He was on my advisory board for the course in IT I ran at Swinburne for 20 years. Right? So, but that was because we'd known each other at MUBC. In the final year, we got a new coach, Alan Landells, who'd been around basketball for a time, had coached some of the big clubs. I'm not sure he ever coached their firsts though.
Who were the big clubs back then?
It was either called Melbourne Church, they were called, which was Ken Watson's team, Andrew Gaze, Billy Wyatt, Barry Barnes, I think. These are all Olympians, and 3 or 4 of them played for the same club, right? So they wiped the slate every year in A grade. No one got anywhere near them. There were the Saints, who I can't remember. They had some big guys, big young guys, sort of my age, the age I was, 18, 19, 20. But 6'6", 6'8", this sort of height. And there hadn't been people of that height playing the game in Melbourne, right? And all of a sudden, the Saints came along with these big guys. They were fairly easily handled because they couldn't run, they couldn't dribble. All they could do was, they could run and dribble well enough to get to the basket, but they couldn't do much else. And we went through the grading games in 61, this is in the 4th year, with Alan as the coach, and we won all our grading games. So I couldn't work out how come we didn't play anyone that was any good. And we made A grade. Now, we were all so excited about it, and, jumping up and down and carrying on, and we turned up the first night. I actually bought my girlfriend and I didn't get on the court. 12 of us. What an anticlimax. 5 weeks later, after Alan Landells took me under his wing and taught me a whole lot about how to actually do body contact. I know basketball's a non-contact sport, but no one had taught me how to do body contact before that and not get fouled, right? And he did, and I changed the game completely, almost overnight, in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks. In the 5th week of the season, I was in the starting 5 as the shooting guard.
And this was playing against the Melbourne Churches, the precursor to the Melbourne Tigers, the Barry Barnes style teams.
Yep. Now it's very interesting. I met a guy who lives only 50 metres away from our beach house at Sorrento, and we sort of kept looking at each other and talking about things, and eventually it turns out he played for Church and I played for Melbourne, right? I can remember one score when we played Church. We played everyone else twice. Melbourne would beat us one time 130 to 30. That's how far out of our depth we were. We're just nowhere with them. We didn't look like beating anyone. It was a huge grading error, I think. We probably would have done all right in B grade, right? And looking at the B grade teams, I think we probably would have been in the top, in the finals.
And that year, what year was that?
61.
And so you were basically playing in the top level of competition of basketball in Australia at that time?
No, or in the state. Yeah.
Well, in the country, I imagine.
All Melbourne sides.
Yeah, but
right,
there wouldn't
no
have
interstate sides.
There were no interstate sides, but I imagine there wouldn't have been a higher standard competition in Australia.
Probably not. I would expect Sydney to have rivaled Melbourne, but I think Melbourne had the impetus of the 56 Olympics, right? And the Albert Park Stadium, right, which was built for the 56 Olympics. Right, and I think that had a huge impact.
Yeah, wow. And throughout that period, I imagine you were studying at Melbourne University.
Yes.
Were there social or non-game events with Melbourne University Basketball Club, or was it purely they put teams on the court and that was it?
No, we had a few parties, shall we say, particularly in my 4th year. I remember Johnny Littleow, who was the point guard, or the first pick point guard, was quite good with the guitar, and he could play all these sing-along songs, and we'd get together, and I think we probably had 3 or 4 of these parties that year. Remember one we had, we finished up somewhere down on the Mornington Peninsula. At that stage I knew the Geelong side pretty well, Bellarine Peninsula, but not Mornington. And I couldn't even tell you where it was, but we finished up sinking a little boat. We were wild boys. The team that actually went to InterVarsity was mostly from the first, but see, some of them couldn't go to Hobart for InterVarsity because they had part-time jobs or whatever, and they needed to be for them.
What year was Hobart?
61. And apparently the photograph I sent you, now I'm trying to think of the name of the guy who Norm Longmuir introduced me to, and one of the nights that we went in there to watch the team play and so on, and go in for the coach's pep talk at half time and before the game and so on. And he wanted a copy of the photograph I sent you, right? But I haven't been able to find it until I had a really good look and looked in my second box of photographs, right? And lo and behold, there it was. I didn't even know I had a second box of photographs. I moved into this house about 16 years ago, and I moved all my stuff.
And so you were like in that period, 58 through 61. You were playing for the club team initially at the showgrounds, but then at Albert Park.
Yep.
And did you represent the university at IV just in 61?
I did, yes.
Not before.
I wouldn't have been good enough before that, honestly. Landell's made such a difference to my game in 61, the start of 61, that, yeah, I'd made it into the first in 61 on my ability before, but I wouldn't have been anything like starting five. Well, as I told you, I didn't get on the court the first week.
What was the IV like? Like, what was the event like? Did they have all the sports, or was it just a select
No, it was
few?
just basketball, nothing else. There could have been other things on, but we didn't know about them. Now, there were two of the guys who went to IV that weren't in the firsts. Kaiser Stanavicius, and I know how to spell his name because I went to school with him and did, well, matric as we called it then with him. And I was the form captain, so I had to be able to spell everyone's name in the form. And Jock Larkins, they came in from the seconds, right, to make up the numbers. But we had a squad of 12 turned up every week to play A-grade Victorian Championships. Right? But the interesting thing I noticed, they were all full-time university students as far as I could tell. Right? Whereas the games I've seen a couple of years ago and so on, none of them were current full-time undergraduate university students. Most of them had nothing to do with Melbourne University except maybe that they'd studied there at some stage.
Yeah, the club has needed to attract players from outside the university to play at the standard that we've been playing at for a while.
Yep.
I guess we haven't been able to attract enough undergraduate students with the level required to play in the division
right.
we're in lately.
Yeah, I noticed there was a huge difference in standard compared to what the standard was when I was playing. Well, I think our tallest guy was 6'3". There were two of them, Barry Bennett, or Barry Dyke as he was before he changed his name. He was a doctor. By the way, he was at Warrnambool for the same time that I was, as a resident, I think, or whatever they call them, doctors. And he and I wet the head of my firstborn son in his accommodation at the hospital.
Fantastic. Yeah, the relationships that form from this basketball club are quite incredible, aren't they? I met my wife here.
Yep.
And so Warrnambool was after you graduated, maybe 61?
Straight after.
Yep. And did you play basketball in Warrnambool? Was there a stadium and a
yes.
competition?
Yep, there was a competition held at the YMCA, and I joined the YMCA team. Now, we actually had Barry Bennett and me, both ex-Melbourne University A-grade, right? And another guy, Maxie Bowman, who'd played with Church. He was only a little guy, but he was the natural captain, the natural leader. We had a couple of surfies, a couple of lifesavers from down there, and a guy called George Capuano, who was about 6'5", so he was our natural centre, right? And we could play with 4 players and still beat any other team in Warrnambool, right?
It's
including the two.
It's funny. I know that like when I joined Melbourne University Basketball Club, maybe 2003, until the tournament stopped, circa 2019, we would go to Warrnambool every Australia Day weekend for a tournament, and we would send lots of teams from Melbourne Uni Basketball Club to play in Warrnambool. Right. Did there used to be a tournament when you were there?
No. There was only one court, and that was in an old quarry, and it was quite dangerous playing basketball. I got injured quite badly a couple of times because one end was the wall of the quarry, right, solid rock. And the number of times I hit that, doing a layup, it was about where you'd normally find the support of the backboard and the basket, right? We're just diabolical to play on.
Wow.
Down the other end was okay.
Was it undercover?
Oh yes, yeah, it was quite good. Uh,
Hardwood floor?
Sorry?
Hardwood floor?
I think it was concrete. No, can't remember. No, it was hardwood. It was hardwood. Now, where did they play when you went down for the tournaments? Do you remember?
Warrnambool have a basketball stadium now. It's quite good. There's lots of courts.
Right. Okay. It wasn't like that when I was... But see, I was down there in 1962-3.
And then you came back to Melbourne University at some point?
I came back to Melbourne. I was actually appointed to Swinburne University. And I got back involved at Melbourne, and I coached an under-19 side for a year and a half.
Which years were those?
64 and the first part of 65. I missed 62 and 63 because that's when I was at Warrnambool.
And how did you get encouraged to come back? How did you touch base back again with the club?
I just turned up on a Saturday afternoon and said, I don't think I'm fit enough to play seriously anymore. And I don't really want to play except in the firsts. So I said, okay, I'll coach a team. I think I knew enough by then to be a reasonable sort of coach. We had, I think we had about 15 players would turn up to training. I had to pick 12 to turn up to the games each week, right? I could field the side 6'5" or taller, but you wouldn't do that, forget it. And my little sort of 6'1", 2, 3 guys would always object if I had more than one of the 6'5" and taller guys on the court at any time. Because remember one guy, Alan Duff, he was 6'5" and he could do everything, right? He was good, right? But most of the other 6'5" guys, they weren't athletic, right? They were just big. See, back then there weren't that many people that tall. Right? I remember when I started teaching at 6'1", I should say 185, right? There wouldn't be that many students in the class taller than me by the time I finished, which is, it's 33 years ago actually now. Half of the males in the class would be taller than me.
What would you attribute that to? You think it's just better diet and upbringing these days?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, nothing else. Both my sons are 2 inches, or one's 2 inches taller than me, one's 3 inches taller than me.
So for your generation, what would your classmates' diet consist of?
Oh, well, I can tell you what mine consisted of. It depended upon whether my dad was doing well as a builder or not making much money. It'd be sausages if he wasn't doing well, and it'd be steak if he was. Mum would always cook, meat and 3 veg for dinner, but it would be nothing like what I would eat now in terms of quality of everything. But there was always enough food. I don't think the balance was right in what we ate. But I think it was just a lot of people. You find that likes attract, and your big tall guys and the big tall girls. The 80th birthday I went to Saturday a week ago was very interesting. The birthday boy is 6'4.5". His 2 girls are both they were both serious netball players, right? And I mean, at one end of the court, they weren't centres or wings or anything like that. They were defence or shooting, one of the two. And I had a look at their daughters, and they each have 2 daughters, and both of them have 2 daughters who are taller than them. And I looked at their husbands, and their husbands are taller than the 6'4.5" father of them. So, likes attract, then you finish up getting extremes, I think.
You'll have to send them down to Melbourne Uni to join our girls program.
That's right. Yeah. No, the grandchildren are in their 20s now.
Right. And so this under-19s team that you coached, I mean, you mentioned when you joined the club there was probably 4 teams or 4 teams in the club. In the mid-60s when you were coaching this under-19s team, how many teams were there? And were there
just
women?
3.
Yep.
First, seconds, and under 19. So it was about the same as it had been. The club seemed to have difficulty getting numbers for some reason. I don't know why. I think at that stage, basketball was nowhere near as popular as it became. Right? And the under 19 squad, they did that because they wanted to have somewhere where they can encourage the first and second year students, right, into the club. But see, in those days, everyone was a student. Some of them might have been research students, but no one in my year was a research student. Johnny Mercer was the oldest guy, and he was doing a master's degree in commerce. That's why he was older. He's the one who, when we all ran out of money in Hobart at IV, he had heaps of money to lend us. Right.
Handy friend to have.
He's very handy because I think we all ran out of money. We just drank too. But, more about IV. We got there in the first 3 games. Alan Landells couldn't make it for the first 3 games, so we managed ourselves and we lost them all, right? Mainly due to the fact I think we'd been playing up the night before and not serious about it. And as soon as Alan got there, it changed, and we didn't lose a game after that. And Sydney, who won the IV, based on there was no finals, it was just round robin. And Sydney, we thrashed them, and they won it because they beat us when Alan wasn't there. We're a totally different side with him around.
Yeah, well, I imagine getting on the grog the night before can't have helped.
It wouldn't have helped at all. And, we're all pretty young, and, I guess 22 was probably the oldest. Right? I was 20. Right?
Where did you stay and where did you play in Tasmania?
We rented, I think, 3 flats in the same block of flats. And we played at the university. I think there was only 1 court, from memory. And, there weren't that many universities at that stage. Monash, I started at Melbourne in 58. Monash opened in 59. Monash had a team there. There were only 2 Victorian university teams there. And I think Sydney had 2, but all the other states only had 1. Right? So there were only about 8, I think.
And it was a dedicated basketball tournament for InterVarsity and no other sports?
As far as I know, yeah. There could have been other sports there, but we didn't fraternise with them. We had a few... remember one night, it was officially sanctioned boat races. You know what a boat race is, don't you?
Sure.
And I was the turkey who, as the night progressed, drank first and last, right? Because we finished up with a few guys who, well, I think they were drunk before we started, right? But this was on the night before we came home, so we could drink, and Alan was quite happy for us to drink as much as we liked. But I finished up so drunk. Because I was drinking 2 to everyone else's 1.
How many boat races?
The ones who were drinking.
How many boat races would you have had that night?
Well, probably 4 or 5. But at the start, we had 10 guys over there, and I think we each took a turn for the first couple. It was only about 2 boat races where I had to drink first and last.
Yeah, some things never change.
We didn't have to pay for our drinks, but that was the reason why it was sanctioned. But I don't know who paid from the Hobart University, I think, because they were the host.
Yep. Yeah, right on. And like during this period that you were around with the club, do you recall how it was administrated? Like, was the university involved, or were there students who were helping to coordinate teams and collection of money and things like that?
No, there was somebody from the student union who was actually, I don't know, but we didn't have to pay for our uniforms from memory, right? Actually, in the same box that I found the photograph that I sent you, I found my old uniform. I thought I'd thrown it away, but I had, I couldn't imagine myself throwing it away, but I hadn't seen it. Well, I've been in this house now for 16 years, and I would have put it in that box when I moved here, right? And boom,
I'd love
forgot
to.
all about it.
I'd love
But it was
to.
quite good to find it. The, the top was sort of cottony sort of material, but the shorts were satin. Would you believe?
They looked very flamboyant in the photo.
Yeah, uh, that was the same one, and it had shop across the front because by that stage, Monash was called the farm, and Melbourne was called the shop.
Right. I see. I never knew the original etymology of that, and why
Yeah.
why was it?
Well, Monash was virtually out in the country when it was first built.
Yep, sure. And so that makes sense. But why did they call Melbourne Uni the shop?
I think it was derisive, a shop where you'd go to get a degree,
I see.
right, basically.
Okay.
And I think Monash called us the shop, but we were quite happy to be called the shop. I don't really know how it originated,
Yeah,
but it was.
yeah, some of the older guys, like when I joined the club, still referred to the club as the shop.
Yep, it's weird, but it was the whole university called the shop, not just MUBC.
Yep, yep. And all these teams of students, so 3 or 4 teams of men's teams that were all consisted of students. Was it was it students a bit of a mix of like people who lived on campus versus Melbourne based students, like people who grew up in Melbourne?
Well, for instance, I came from Geelong, and I was on a secondary education department secondary studentship, which meant that I was eligible to live in one of their hostels, and I did. I spent 2 years in Punt Road, opposite the back of Wesley, and 2 years in Queens Road, well, within 150 metres of the basketball stadium, right, at number 19 Queens Road. And I think we're on, for the first 2 years, £5.10 a week was our living allowance, and the full board cost £2, half of that, £2.15 a week. It makes no sense in today's terms, but you weren't hungry ever. You always got plenty to eat. Sometimes you had a room to yourself. My first year, there were 4 of us in the one room, so that wasn't very good for study and sleep and that sort of thing. But I think 1 year I had a room to myself, but generally speaking, you shared a room.
And who was funding this program?
The education department, right? Incredible. They built, to my certain knowledge, about 8 of these hostels. They didn't necessarily build them, some of them were already built, right, around Melbourne, but generally they'd take a big old mansion and stick something equivalent to a block of apartments on the back of it, right? And that became a hostel one of the hostels I lived in had 60 students there. The other one had 120, one in Queens Road.
And
that's a lot.
Were these accommodations specifically for country boys to study? And was there like a qualification for them? Did you need to graduate matriculation with a certain standard to be accepted into this program, or everyone from the country who went to uni was eligible?
Anyone who could get into a university course, but let me tell you that everyone could get into a university course then. The only reason I didn't do medicine is that my parents couldn't afford to pay for me to do medicine. I wanted to be a doctor. Okay. My second choice was a secondary school teacher, and that was doable because of these studentships.
What was the cost associated with the medicine degree?
It was the time, it was the length of time, and a lot more cost than, say, for a science degree.
But if the government was paying for your board, like, does it what?
No, that was the education department doing that.
Right.
Right. If I wanted
Oh,
to do medicine, I didn't have that. I would have had a Commonwealth scholarship,
I see.
which gave you, in those days, gave you about £200 or something for the year.
I see.
Forget it.
So specifically, you were given accommodation at university because you were studying to be an educator or a secondary school teacher.
Exactly. Yep. Now, a lot of us finished up not spending very long with the education department. A lot of us moved into universities, right? Because they managed to pick up some pretty smart kids from the country who otherwise probably wouldn't have gone to university. Like, couldn't have afforded to go to university. I know two guys, one of which was a vice chancellor at Melbourne, right, and another one was the dean of the Faculty of Education. These are guys my era, right? Guys I went through with. All three of us happened to be Geelong boys, but that was just coincidental, right? And another guy, emeritus professor at Monash. Two or three guys have been professors at Monash. I was never a professor at Swinburne because I got out and went to ANZ before Swinburne really hit its straps as a university, before they started giving professorships.
Sure.
But I wouldn't have got it because I only had a master's degree, not a PhD.
Sure. After you came back to Melbourne from Warrnambool and you were coaching the under-19s team.
Yep.
Did you continue to play at all?
No, not then. And in the June of 65, I joined IBM, and that was the end of the penny section because I never knew from 1 week to the next which city I would be in, whether it be Melbourne. It was mostly a toss-up between Melbourne and Sydney. But see, they had to train me in computing, and it was the best training you could get at that stage. There was not a computer science course in Australia in 65, right? Peter Poole started one at Melbourne, I don't know, probably about 70-ish, right? But we started a course at Swinburne. It was already going when I went back there after I'd been to IBM.
Yeah.
Right?
And
IBM provided the best IT training probably in the world at that stage. It was unbelievable.
Oh, wow.
You were effectively learning for the first 2 years. You did a bit of work, but you weren't honestly much use. By the end of the second year, you were totally useful. Right?
Sounds like you got pretty lucky there, Ralph. And
it was the best decision I ever made.
Fantastic. And back to the basketball.
Yep.
You mentioned that.
I did play basketball after that, after IBM, when I actually went back to Swinburne. Right. We started a team there, and I played. My son, when he was in about grade 6 at school, my eldest son, his teacher had a team playing at Nunawading, and he'd asked me to play, so I played there for a few years. I couldn't run as well as I wanted to, but I could still shoot. Right, and they were quite happy. It was not a high quality team or anything like that. It was the sort of team I wouldn't have wanted to play for at Mubc in 65, 64, 65.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there, like at that time, were there many places to play basketball, to your recollection?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Nunawading was the nearest one to me, but there were other heaps of other places. A lot of schools had basketball courts by then, right? I know Box Hill did. That was a big basketball school.
And you mentioned that, like, what piqued your interest in basketball in the first place was the '56 Olympics in Melbourne, and perhaps
Absolutely.
also some TV coverage. Was that TV coverage of the Olympic Games?
And only of the Olympic Games. I didn't see, let's call it, any US basketball on TV for a long time.
Yep.
I don't think we had it. Right?
Yep.
You know,
Yeah, and the Olympic basketball at that time, I guess it was like Bill Russell was playing for the Yanks, and
yeah.
did they air all the games? Like, is that how you saw it?
As I recall, there were games on any time I could talk my two brothers and sister into watching what I wanted to watch, and I was the eldest, so I tended to have more than my fair share. But I didn't attend any basketball games. The school brought us down up from Geelong for athletics, and that was all you could do, right? All you could see. I came up for 2 days of athletics.
Olympic athletics?
Yep, as a 15-year-old or whatever it was. MCG.
Fantastic. Right. And the games that were broadcast, are we talking black and white or colour, audio?
It was all black and white in those days. As I see, that was early days for television in Australia, 56. I'm not sure, but I think television was introduced primarily because of the games, because there'd be people here recording everything, and they could just. My memory is not 100% clear, but I'm pretty sure that was when TV started in Australia, or in Melbourne and Sydney at least.
Yeah, fantastic. It's such
a long time ago.
Yeah, it's such an interesting story. I mean, we can still walk along in Carlton Gardens, walk past the exhibition buildings there, and see where they played those games. You know, it's pretty special to think about.
Yeah, so it was a different age, different era. It was 60-something years ago.
Yeah. Well, that's some wonderful stories there, Ralph. Thank you so much for sharing about your time with MUBC. I'm sure this will go into the history books for sure.
Yep. Now, there are other people, but I don't know where they are. I'll try and scare some of the other guys up. But Rod Klassen, who was probably the main forward on our team at that stage, I'm sure he was a University Blue. There's a list of them on the website somewhere too, University Blues going all the way back.
We can find them. Yeah, we can find that list.
Yeah, I should have had a look to see which of those guys made it as Blues. I know Rod did. And no, he's the only one I'm sure of.
Yeah, well,
some of the others probably would have been good enough to get granted a blue. Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Ralph, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome, Jason.
And we hope to see you at another alumni event at some point in time.
Yes, I hope we have them, and I'm on the mailing list or the email list, and I'll be there. I'll be there.
All right on. Catch you later, Ralph.
Good. Thanks, Jason.